Today we're going to be talking about the new balance update that is coming to Star Wars Squadrons. This is the 4th balance patch that has been released since the new year, and in this video we're going to be discussing exactly why these changes are huge to the game. So much so that this is going to affect everyone on all spectrums of the skill level. So for people who aren't exactly pro players to this game, this is going to interest you as well. And guys, before I jump into it, this video is sponsored by our Patreons. If you want really cool stuff like EcksToo newsletters, videos that will never be launched live on EcksToo, or have your very own EcksToo avatar designed by a professional artist, be sure to join our Patreon in the top right corner of this video or in the pinned comment down below. But with that out of the way, let's get right into the video. So on March the 15th, we have seen a new balance patch come to Star Wars Squadrons. In this 4.0 balance update, we're seeing changes to the A-Wing, X-Wing, U-Wing, Y-Wing, TIE Fighter, Bomber, Interceptor, and Reaper. And all of these ships are going to have a boost activation cost be increased by 60%. That's a massive change, which we'll be getting into a little bit later on in the video. Next up are nerfs to the support ships, the U-Wing and the TIE Reaper. The Squadron Mask component has had its cooldown increased from 20 seconds up to 28 seconds, and the duration of Squadron Mask component whilst activated has dropped from 10 seconds down to 7 seconds. Next up is the targeting beacon component for the support ships. The cooldown on that component has increased from 30 seconds up to 35 seconds. Now, as for balancing, that's all we have for this patch. But before you go, let me explain to you why this is a big deal for you in particular. As mentioned previously, a lot of these changes are going to affect everyone from the low tier up to the pro tier. But the first of these 4 changes is the biggest out of the lot of them. The boost activation cost being increased by 60% for all ships apart from the TIE Defender will force all players to drift a lot less. So for new players who aren't actually aware of this, you have to use up a little bit of your boost reserve to actually start boosting in the first place. This is called boost activation cost. So for a standard player, if they keep boosting and then stopping and then boosting and then stopping, you'll lose boost faster than another player who boosts from point A all the way to point B without stopping. A lot of pro players circumvented this negative through means of boost skipping and boost gasping. Now those two methods are quite complex and we discussed them in a different video, so I'll link that video in the top right corner now if you want to figure out what those are. But for now, in this video, if you don't know what they are, they're not necessarily that important. Essentially, this nerf targets pro players who try to circumvent this negative the most. But in the process, obviously it's going to affect a lot of medium tier and low tier players as well. But honestly, this is kind of a good thing, because for medium tier and low tier players, it means they're going to have to take some time to understand their power management. So if you're in New Republic, you need to make sure that you're diverting your power elsewhere when boosting. That could be for regenerating your shields or building up a little bit of extra firepower. For Empire players, you absolutely need to have all your power into lasers whilst boosting. And this is because not a lot of newer to medium level tier players know that you use up the same amount of boost whether you have full power to engines or not. So there's a little tip for you there if you didn't know that. But essentially, anybody who knows how to drift in this game, they're going to feel some of these effects. It's going to stop people from ping-ponging all the way around the map, trying to drift into different angles constantly and frequently, which ultimately makes them very hard to target with rockets, let alone primary weapons. This is a good thing, because for pro players, this means they're going to have to hold onto their power as long as they can until they actually need to use it to survive. That's a very basic overview, and we do discuss it again in the video that I mentioned earlier. But for now, let's move on. Next up are the 3 nerfs coming to the U-Wing and TIE Reaper support classes. Now these are nerfs to the components which are Squadron Mask and targeting beacons. These 2 components are pretty much used by all pro support players. They are just so much stronger than anything else that the support class has. Squadron Mask allows all the players around a support ship to just disappear and become untargetable, and that duration can last up to 10 seconds. Targeting beacons prevents people from using their countermeasures against rockets and also take a 30% increase in damage. This also applies to frigates, raiders and flagships. And honestly, both those components are so overloaded that pro support players just have to run it all the time. So the fact that both of these components are getting nerfs, it's not really a surprise. Your team is at a massive disadvantage if you don't run either one of these components and the enemy players are. So taking some of that power away from both of these components might make a little bit of an impact, but honestly, I think a lot of pro players are still going to run both of these components. That just goes to show how strong both of these components are. You nerf them both quite significantly, and they are still far more important than any other component a support player can run. I asked a lot of pro players, the team that I play with, and Eckhart's Ladder, their thoughts and opinions on these changes. A lot of people believe that the Y-Wing probably should have been left alone. The Y-Wing is significantly weaker than a TIE Bomber. This is because its maneuverability is far worse than its counterpart, the TIE Bomber. Not to mention it has literally nowhere near as much firepower as the TIE Bomber as well. And it loses all of these components in return for having shields. And because the ion missile is so popular amongst X-Wing, TIE Fighter and TIE Defenders alike, it makes having those shields almost useless for the Y-Wing, especially when it's not supposed to be dogfighting. I main Bomber myself, and as somebody who runs AI farming almost every game, I'm able to survive against enemy players in a TIE Bomber far easier than a Y-Wing. And that just comes down to the fact that I'm faster, I can boost away a lot quicker, and if I really need to, I can dogfight because I have a lot more firepower. So the fact that the Y-Wing is getting this boost activation nerf as well, makes me think that I'm going to have to try and tweak my loadout a little bit to compensate these nerfs. But for the TIE Bomber, I don't think I really need to change it that much. A lot of people also agreed that we didn't see this nerf for the TIE Defender either. So whilst the TIE Defender did have two different types of nerfs across two different balance update patches, the fact that they're avoiding this boost activation cost increase might actually make them overpowered again. So I'm not surprised if a lot of pro players tend to start running 4 TIE Defenders and 1 support again. And everyone remembers how that went down in the Calrissian Cup in January. It was just TIE Defender galore because it was the most powerful ship in the game. And yes, the B-Wing doesn't suffer this nerf either, but the B-Wing is just so far behind in terms of impactfulness in medium to high tier gameplay that these nerfs are just still not going to make it viable. Sorry B-Wing main players, you're still in the bottom tier. As for the support component nerfs, I think pro players and myself alike pretty much all agree that this was going to happen. Its usage rate was just far too high and something needed to change. As mentioned before, I personally don't think these nerfs are going to make people change their components as support players. I still think both of these components are still insanely overtuned, and I don't really have any solutions that make these, normal compared to all other support components. Is that maybe Squadron Mask should only mask 3 players instead of all 4, and that targeting beacons need to be split up into 2 different components where you can mark players for extra damage or prevent them from using their countermeasures. Having both in one component is just too much. But those were my thoughts and opinions, as well as mixed up with some other pro players' thoughts and opinions and Twin Sun Squadrons. This is where I pass the question over to you guys. What do you think about these nerfs across the entire board? Do you think I'm right? Do you think the Y-Wing wasn't that powerful at all and its nerf wasn't warranted? Are you upset that the B-Wing didn't get any buffs? Are you upset that the TIE Defender didn't get nerfs alongside this as well? And what are your thoughts on the support nerfs in its components? I'm giving you a lot of questions here, so give me the whole essay if you need to. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. But other than that, guys, I have been Charlie, you've been watching EcksToo, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.